Welcome, welcome, welcome everyone to this edition of Crashes and Taxes. I am so excited to be with you today. I am Rebecca Walser, and just wanted to start off by saying that this is going to be a no slide podcast. So if you usually join via video, I am doing still a video, but I'm not going to do slides today because I'm just going to talk to you today. There's so much going on that it is impossible for me to truncate the information in a concise format to actually fit into a podcast. It would have to be several podcasts. So let's talk about what's going on in the world. And everything affects the markets. Let me just say, you guys know that I run a wealth management practice, a national wealth management practice based in Tampa. We have clients all over. And this podcast is not that. These two things are completely separate, right? I do this and to give you guys my, I believe, well-rounded professional thoughts and opinions about economics, markets, tax policy, politicians that affect tax policy. There's this false situation going around where if you are, some kind of, you're in one discipline area that you can't discuss other areas. Well, first of all, there's nothing that affects my area of markets, taxes, and economics more so than politicians, because they set both the fiscal and the monetary policy, all right? They set it. They are the ones that elect the Federal Reserve Chairman. They are the ones that, so the Fed really runs the monetary policy. That was a mistake that our country made in 1913 that we will rectify. It will be rectified. And that's really where we're headed. That's what's happening. As I've been expressing to you guys, we are at the precipice. I'm excited today. I'm in the studio today on Thursday. Excuse me, not Thursday, Wednesday. It's Wednesday, November the 16th. So just so a frame of reference, if you go back or if you share this with other people and you guys are not sure when I was in the studio recording this, this is Wednesday, November the 16th. And I'm really excited, I think, for the first time in probably 30 months. It's been a really long slog. I think many of you that watch and resonate with this podcast understand what I'm saying. It's been a very long road. I remember I was in DC when in March of 2020, I was at some meetings in DC. And when we were informed that one of the attendees had come down with coronavirus. Now, this was the first week of March of 2020. And so at that point, I had heard rumblings of it, of course, in Asia, but there was nothing about testing or anything. Do we even have testing in the United States yet? And it was like, bam, this is in your face. This is happening. I went back home, and within a matter, I think, of 10 days, we were remote and locking down and shutting the world down. That's how fast everything went. And since that day, March of 2020, when I was in DC for those in meetings, to fast forward to present day, November 2022, it has felt like the longest period of my life. And probably it feels like the longest period of your life. But I am on here today to encourage you, because I'm telling you, we are in the ending stages of this situation. Things are about to change massively and very quickly. And I am so excited. Now, for people like you that have been following the real depth of the news. So the mainstream media, at this point, and you guys have to know that, we weren't able, the mainstream media wasn't able to give you false information, propaganda. That was never allowed in America until they repealed the Swift-Mudd Act and they passed another act in 14. And so now the media has a much more open license legally, and you should all be aware of that. It wasn't like, oh, now we're able to do these things and we're starting to do them and we're not going to, we're going to tell you. No, there was no, we're going to tell you and share with you. There was just, now this is where we are, and we're going to start doing this. So the issue that creates when you don't have a media that, I think of media and journalism as the intention of people to get the truth to their end consumers, right? That's what the idealistic idea of media should be, especially in a free and fair society where we as Americans, I don't know if you guys remember this or not, but this is an absolute principle of the United States founding government, is that we people hold our government accountable and responsible to us, the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. So whenever the government gets away from that, then, we get upset and we say, oh, let's use elections. Now, I have shared on this podcast before, and a lot of you, interestingly enough, seem to want data. You guys, if you're trying in 2022 to get data on the statistical analysis of the 2020 election, it's out there. Every county, it has been analyzed statistically from 2020, and the data is out there and available. I can promise you that unless I'm clearly giving you an opinion, if I'm saying something that I'm stating as a fact, it's because I have a document that states it's a fact. I'm not just making up facts and just giving you my thoughts. I will tell you when I'm giving you my opinions and thoughts. And of course, a lot of the show is my opinion, of course, 100%. But as a person whose disciplines are the law and math, those two things, the law is definitely gray. In fact, the law being gray is where we get the problem with the law. If the law was just simply totally black and white and everybody knew exactly what it was, there would never be any room for wiggle room. We have district attorneys, we have prosecutors that have discretion because discretion is needed in the law. Let me give you an example. If you had a black and white system that everything was very clearly delineated, and you said, oh, you know what, the neighbor's 17-year-old killed the stepfather last night in a black and white mutually exclusive world, we might say, well, that guy needs to be arrested and probably sit in jail the rest of his life, or maybe even worse. Maybe he gets a worse punishment than jail the rest of his life. But then when you hear that it was the stepfather and that he had been abusing the boy and since he was 7 years old, and this is an example I'm making up, even if it resembles a real case, it's an example I'm making up. The point is, we then have a gray judgment grading that comes over that situation. And now we say, oh, well, maybe this was emotional abuse. Maybe this was a defensive. Maybe this was any one of a number of things. And the situation is no longer so clear that this guy should be sitting in jail for the rest of his life. That's what happens in the law. There has to be the ability, and it's usually a human, although eventually AI will potentially make these decisions. And then I would still think a human would have to come in and with human logic. But a human has to look at that situation and make a call. So the law is very gray. The other area that the law becomes gray in is where people read a statute one way and another group reads a statute a different way. And then we have just dispute over how the statute is actually interpreted. There's a lot of statutory interpretation in courts and case law. So that's the other really gray area. But understand that law is nuanced and it's not as black and white as everyone thinks. Oh, the law says this. Well, does it really say that? Or could we read it a different way? Could it be interpreted a different way? They never saw this situation, so we don't know how the law would really handle this. So that's the law. Math, thank God. There's one discipline that I love absolutely that is 100% always right, always right, always right. I was helping my youngest with her fourth grade math. And, it's a lot of basic pre-algebra stuff, that you're laying the foundations. And I have to go over a lot of it with her. And I'm a math nerd, right? So this should be easy. But, being able to know something and teach it are two very different things. So thank God I do have a little bit of a teacher in me that I'm able to do what I need to do. But math is black and white, and it is definitive. And there's very little. You can maybe look at geometry and some, infinity type of things. But for the most part, algebraic and moving on to calculus and trigonometry, these are all formulaic math that always resolve, just like logic, to an actual exact answer. And so what I will say about 2020 is that the data is out there. You don't need to ask me, where's the data? It is widely available. Now, it might not be widely available on a search engine that restricts searches. So I don't know what you're using, but definitely the information is definitely publicly widely available. There's been all kinds of groups that have gone all over the country for since 2020, I think, or starting in 2021, and have had multiple expert speakers that bring up statistical data. The data is there. That brings me fast forward to 2022, and what was expected to be one way and then really wasn't that way. And so I made a comment before when I was being interviewed with my producer, Matt, he asked me about the midterms. And I said, well, there's going to be a disruption. It's going to be something. And, we can't really look to 2022 when we haven't really resolved 2020 statistically. I'm not talking about candidates or policies or anything. I'm talking about the facts of statistics. I don't want to argue semantics and policies and who's a bad person and who's a good person and I'm just talking about the actual statistics, right? So 2022 is a second situation that is coming now. And a lot of people are disappointed because they potentially thought it was going to go a specific way towards their way or something, and it didn't happen. And so again, what this is a recognition from us as humans that are consuming this news in America of how our elections went. And it is for us to say whether that information resonates to truth or whether that information resonates to something doesn't add up with all of the data that we were getting pre-election day, where the country was headed. Even, I think, MSNBC, and I watch all the news sources because I must know everything. Even MSNBC did an exit poll and was finding that over, I won't quote you the exact numbers, but it was some massive majority of the country, I want to say somewhere in the 70s, was thinking the country was going the wrong direction. So it wasn't a result that would line up with those kinds of exit polling or even pre-polling. And so what you have to understand then is that is not going to be the mechanism by which things in this world change. The elections in America are not going to be that mechanism, at least at this present time. And that leads me to talk about Berlin and to talk about Brazil. Yesterday in Brazil, on the 15th, 3 million people gathered to literally protest the results of their election. And they have the same statistical anomalies. And I'm not going to say the same in the sense of it was the exact same situation. I'm just going to tell you it was this. I already gave you on the last podcast that 5 million votes seem to be statistically impossible. And so there is Bolsonaro and his group are trying to follow the Constitution, but also see that there is the inability to certify and verify the veracity of that election. So we're looking at Brazil as something potentially could come of that. Berlin has just voted to redo their elections because their elections were fraudulent. So it's not like this is, don't think of America in a silo, you guys. America isn't just in a silo experiencing the fact that all of a sudden our elections aren't exactly as we expected them to be based on where the public sentiment was or is. This is a global situation. And I won't really go into this podcast into the origin of its roots, but I will just point you to the fact that, Venezuela was sort of the beginning of ownership of voting machines. And you can look at the history and find it out from there. So the bottom line is this is not going to get rectified through elections, and that's fine. We don't need elections to rectify this. Americans are American. We were birthed leaving a tyrannical government behind for a new world of freedom and liberty and truth. And even if we have been derelict in our duties to see that is protected at all costs, all the time, forever, since 1776, even if we have been deficient in our responsibility to make sure that our freedoms are not crept in upon, because we have come a long way from 1776 to 2022. Such a long way. And you look at America now, and I would suggest to you that we are a country that has a false sense of democracy and a false sense of freedom. And you don't have to look any further than January 6th people, prisoners that are still in custody, many of them yet without a trial. And this will be 2 years in January. I mean, as a lawyer, this is despicable. Where's the habeas corpus motions? Where are the lawyers fighting for these people? And I've seen some high profile attorneys get involved. I keep thinking, okay, something's going to happen now, but nothing's happening for these people. We don't hold people without trials for 2 years. And then you saw Christopher Wray in front of Congress, and a gentleman questioned him and asked him specifically about the embedded FBI agents on January 6th that were on the ground, because the FBI has now admitted in congressional testimony that they did have embeds on January 6th. And so this congressperson, following up on that information, asked, well, were they dressed like Trump supporters? In other words, were they dressed as if they were playing a role as if they were a Trump supporter at the January 6th? And Ray was very upset about that question and refused to answer it. And this is getting into an area of federal entrapment, because you cannot, as the federal government or as any government, you cannot go and be part of I will call it a conspiracy for no other better reason. You can't go be part of a conspiracy and then, step back and not be prosecuted while all the people that you helped push to a specific direction are being prosecuted or rotting in jail for 2 years. So Ray clearly does not want to go down the road of what these embeds were doing, how they were dressed, or how they were acting, because that's a real problem for the FBI. So we've got FBI, basically serving a subpoena on a former president. We have embeds on the January 6th, and we know what happened on January 6th as according to how it's been delivered from the media. So we have all of these things that are showing, are we really free anymore? We used to say about World War II that the Japanese internment of innocent Japanese people that were just in our borders when World War II, when Pearl Harbor happened, we used to say that should never happen again. We should never single out a group of people and just indiscriminately hold them. That's not what we do in this country. That might be how they did it in Nazi Germany, but we do not do that in the United States of America. So I think when you start to realize, as we've all moved on with our lives and are, living, working, breathing, and we have to stop and think about those people that are still not even having trial dates yet and are in the DC system. So we have to ask ourselves, if we aren't really truly free like we used to be in 1776, and that's for sure. We become also, it was really obvious to me, and this was years ago now in law school, that we are an administrative state. There's a Chevron discretion, basically deference. Chevron I'm not going to go into it for those lawyers that watch my podcast. You know exactly what I'm talking about. But Chevron is basically a judicial rule through case law that we give the executive branch of government a lot of deference for how they create rules and function in enforcing the law. And that is given us, and not just Chevron alone, not that one case, but the deference that has been given to the nanny state. So the way our government is supposed to work at a really, really high level is, and this is all moving to something, you guys, for those of you that just want the market stuff, this might be a boring podcast for you, you might not want to listen, but I do want to give you some really important information. But please, if you're going to write me and say, why did you just talk about freedom and liberty and Constitution, and please don't write me. Please just get off the podcast and let me talk about what I want to without you guys sending me an email. I think I can do that. It's my First Amendment. You don't have to listen. Feel free not to listen. But if you are on the same elk with me, I think that you'll enjoy what I'm sharing. So obviously we have an executive branch, we have a legislative branch, and we have a judicial branch. The executive branch, let's start with the legislative branch. The legislative branch is supposed to make the laws. I remember, back in, I think was like it was like following a bill. It was a little ABC or NBC. It was probably Peacock. Like, let's follow, when you were a little kid, let's follow a bill and its journey to becoming a law. And it sort of went through, and it was really great. And we need those public service announcements to come back. So basically, the legislature makes the laws. The executive branch then enforces, or is supposed to enforce a law. It shouldn't be optional. And then the judicial interprets the laws. When there are those gray areas where people are reading the law to say one thing when it's being interpreted a different way in specific cases or whatever, then that's where we have law. We have what we call cases and controversies, and we go to the judicial branch to resolve those cases and controversies. And so it's a check and balance on everything. The executive appoints the judicial, the legislative confirms the judicial oversees and has oversight. It's all a check and balance system. That system gets out of whack if one group isn't enforcing the law. Let's just use the border as an example, because I do want to bring up Governor Abbott, and what he just did yesterday on November 15th was, I will tell you, this Governor Abbott situation is one of the most federalistic moves of a state that we have seen in probably 100 years. Governor Abbott came out swinging and basically said that he declared that the state of Texas was under invasion, and that he was going to use his power as the governor of the state of Texas through both the United States Constitution and the Texas Constitution to invoke powers that he can have constitutionally when there is an invasion. And I don't have it up because I wasn't planning on actually reading all of this to you, but the actual invasion of a state can be dealt with. And how can it be dealt with? Basically, he can call up the National Guard. He can basically alert the National Guard, and the National Guard, he can actually send troops to the border. And I want to read the statement to you, because not only is he stating that he will send the National Guard to the border, but he has also stated that he will put gunboats in the water to protect the sovereignty of Texas's border. So I'm going to tell you guys, this is a huge development towards the reunification and the rectification of what has been going on in the United States. So for a state to realize, and DeSantis sort of did this when there was a prosecutor in Hillsborough County, Florida, which is one of the largest counties in the country. But there was a prosecutor in Hillsborough County, Florida, that's similar to other prosecutors in other states like San Francisco and LA that specifically come to mind, and New York, that was refusing to enforce certain laws. And Florida had passed some laws that this prosecutor didn't agree with. And specifically, we're talking about the Disney situation and the parents' choice and all these things. And this prosecutor stated publicly on the record that he was not going to enforce that law. So what DeSantis did as a governor, because this has been happening around the country with multiple major cities, what DeSantis did as a governor is he fired him. He said, I am the chief executive of this state, and I have the ultimate supervisory authority over any executive member of the state, even if you're elected, because this prosecutor was an elected position, and you're fired. You do not have the discretion. Prosecutors have discretion, as I just mentioned the case of the young boy who killed the stepfather. And then, you could think that was just awful and he needs to sit in jail the rest of his life. But then when you learn the facts, the surrounding circumstances, because of your human empathy, you understand that it's not just so direct one way or the other. So these prosecutors must have discretion to try cases or not try cases based on the facts and circumstances of that case. However, they don't have the discretion to just blatantly and publicly state, I'm not going to enforce a law. So DeSantis fired him and said, this is how you handle prosecutors of this ilk if you're the governor of a state. And so that was a really big shot across the bow of how, these kinds of things can be handled. And now you see Abbott in Texas stepping up. It's a federalism issue, by the way. I mean, and when you have all of these southern states that are sending, people that are coming across the border, busing them to other states, northern states, this is all a federalism issue. What these governors are finally saying is, federal government, if you're not going to enforce the border, then we're going to take these people and we're not going to keep, paying for them. We're going to send them to you. You guys pay for them. So it's the states starting to say, Hey, and I want you to know, don't forget about this. This is very normal. We really had a strong federalistic union that was very state focused. And this is really for the beginning of our republic. Think about it. I mean, the northern states were obviously against slavery and the southern states were very much so for slavery. And eventually that caused the Civil War. And we had to go through that in the 1800s. But the point is that the states were always very different from each other. The northern states specialized in completely different things than the southern states, which were much more agricultural. So they were more urban to start when they developed, and they were position, ports of trade and all of these things. So what I'm trying to tell you is we had initially a government that was really for the states, and it was a very loose federal system. Lincoln changed that with the Civil War because the southern states were frankly wrong. And there's nobody on earth, I don't believe, that could possibly deny the states were wrong. So Lincoln had the unique situation of being the president that had to deal with the fact that the North finally decided they're going to do something about the South and what they're doing. It's wrong, wrong, and wrong. And he had to. And Lincoln is probably the singular president, and I'm no history buff, you guys, but he's probably from a legal perspective, the singular president from to that date that took a lot more power to the federal executive and specifically the presidency. He did many things that you probably don't even realize that he did to get the country back on track. And it almost obviously killed us. I mean, it almost ripped us. We were completely broke after. It was a long, long slog to economic recovery. And then, of course, the South and everything they did, which continued on to affect our country and give us problems all the way up until the Civil Rights Movement to rectify the South. And still to this day, we have lingering results of that horror. So Abraham Lincoln really took a lot of power as he had to save the Union and to do what was right. And so then we started to go more towards the way of, okay, well, the states are wrong and the federal government needs to protect us. And that was a shift from where we came from over, from England. That was an absolute shift. And you saw that went along for a while. And actually it has only grown. The federal government has become this behemoth. There are probably anywhere from 100 regulations that regulate everything that you do between your state, your local, and your federal government on a daily basis. There's probably at least 5 or 6 laws that you break every day. And that's not because you're doing anything nefarious. It's just because there's so many laws. We've become a nanny state. And so now we're going in the exact opposite direction where we're saying, and we're just using this border as an example. Okay, administration, if you're going to allow this many people to come in, the last I checked, and don't quote me on the numbers, but these are the roundabout numbers. On the last year of President Trump's presidency, 2020, there were 400,000 that crossed. And then year to date, so far this year, we're already at, as according to the number I've seen, 2 million. So you can see the scope of the problem has increased massively, and states are starting to figure out, what can we do? Can we shift people to a different state? They let them bear the burdens. It's easy to be a state that's for not really caring about the border if you're not a border state. If you're a border state, you have to figure out what the heck you're going to do. I know I love the analysis done by New York, talking about how much they had spent in just the 3 or 4 months that they have had received busfuls of people, how much they've spent. So it's good for these other states to realize that this is not a burden that border states cannot bear alone if we're going to allow this many people into the country. So you're now seeing a shift back to federalism and states' rights and state authority, because there's a lot of authority in a state governor and in a state executive. I mean, states are literal mini countries, if you will. I like to, they're not, but obviously, but let's compare it to Europe, and the EU. Like the EU's got 23 member states, right? And the EU is an overall superseding body. It's not a country, but it's a regulating body that they've all agreed to submit themselves to. And yet they still retain their country sovereignty. Now they don't retain sovereignty over immigration policy and all the things that they had agreed to do to get into the European Union. They have economic requirements, but they still maintain their individual country's sovereignty. So the states that all got admitted to the union, all had to agree to certain things to get admitted to the union, and they have a certain amount of autonomy and sovereignty. This is why we have state government and we have federal government. And this is something that cannot really be compared to any other country because it is so unique, and it does make us very strong. So we're moving now into an era of back into federalism where states are again, and Abbott and his statement. Now, I want to point out 3 parts of his statement. Number 1, he's saying he has the authority under both the United States Constitution and the Texas Constitution when the state is in an invasion situation, which he is declaring the state of Texas is under invasion. He is calling out the National Guard. He is going to put troops on the border. He is going to put boat ships, it's in his statement, go read it, in the water. And he is going to work, and this is really important, this is a big legal issue, he is going to work with other states on protecting the borders. So now you've got him working with other independent governmental bodies to create some kind of agreement to protect the border. So this is a really big announcement by Abbott. I know that it didn't get as much play because it was the same night that Trump basically announced that he was going to rerun for 2024. But this, from a legal perspective, you guys, is really, really big. So that's how I feel about the election as far as what happened. The statistics don't bear it out. And I believe that that will be addressed. Right now, what you've seen is a bunch of, I think, Republicans that have conceded, even though there was definitely statistical issues with their election. And so that should tell you something. Why are these Republicans in very hotly contested elections across the country just blatantly and quickly conceding? Why would you spend all of your time, energy, and money to run for an office that you were told with polling that you were going to win? Then you have all these, let's use Arizona as the worst example, of all these 30% of machines that can't process people that are coming to vote that day. And then, and I'm not saying Carrie Lake, I'm not saying anything about Carrie Lake, but then you go ahead and concede. So you have to start asking yourself the question, is there some other situation happening here that all of these Republicans aren't going down the road this time of fighting like Donald Trump did in 2020? What is happening with that? Is there another plan? And of course, the answer is there is an actual another plan, and we are in it, and we are almost through it, and it almost is going to be here. Let's talk about FTX, because this is obviously a big thing that everybody wants to know about. And FTX could be 2 podcasts or even 3. The amount of research that needs to go into this company and Alameda Research and all of these other subsidiary conglomerates of this massive group that has been put together is unbelievable. I can't even begin to describe to you the depth of this FTX. Now, I want to clarify something, as a lot of people are talking about this guy. Sam, the CEO, was the second largest donor to Democrats for the 2022 election behind George Soros. And while that is all true, it's publicly listed on NBC. You can see the top 10 donors. FTX did also donate $23 million to Republicans. Which Republicans, I don't know. I don't look at it at that level. But I just want you to know this is not just FTX donated to the Democrats and they're a Democratic Party machine. They also did donate to Republicans at a very high level without going into facts, because it's not something that I have prepared with slides to give you guys documentation on. What the issue is that what we understand, and Ukraine, of course, is going to deny this. They already have. But what we understand is that in America, we pass a lot of aid. Some lots and lots of hundreds of millions of dollars in aid have gone to Ukraine since February when Russia invaded. So we pass all this aid for the Ukrainian people to help the Ukrainian efforts to defend their sovereignty and their borders. And so we sent them this money. It is reported, Ukraine is denying it, but it is reported that Ukraine then took that money, part of that money, and invested it with FTX directly. FTX then donated these massive millions to both Democrats and Republicans, more to Democrats, but they still donated to Republicans. So you can start to see, well, is any of the aid money that we sent to Ukraine that's then being invested in FTX coming back then to any kind of federal politician on any side? It doesn't matter what side you're on. Corruption is corruption. Fraud is fraud. And that would be bad. We are not prepared at this point to say if the facts of how all of that transpired. We're just laying out that is the general consensus of why this is an issue and why they're looking into it. FTX, though, is touches many, 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 many people across all spectrums in the government of the United States. There's a lot of people that are at the highest levels of oversight, regulation, and power that were or had some kind of investment relationship with FTX. That doesn't mean that anything was nefarious at all. We have no idea. We are going to wait for the facts and the data. But the contagion issue is what we worry about with FTX, because we obviously, I've told you guys my thoughts on cryptocurrency and the blockchain. I mean, the AI that is coming on the blockchain that's already here, the things that you can do with Ethereum, smart contracts, how you can buy cars without any human interaction, how cars can be turned off while you're driving if you miss payments. The AI on the blockchain that is coming, I have mentioned before in multiple podcasts, is absolutely phenomenal. But so there is no issue with the blockchain, and there should not be an issue with cryptocurrency. But what is being leveraged now with this FTX collapse? You saw the largest crypto exchange, Binance CEO, come out immediately within days and start saying regulation is necessary. The CEO of FTX is saying you need to have regulation. Everyone is using this example as a reason to push regulation. I just want you to understand the sense of moronicness that you have decentralized finance. We call it DeFi, decentralized finance, which is supposed to be outside the purview of all governments everywhere across the earth, now talking about promulgating a substantial amount of regulation. It's a problem. It's a problem. I don't think the solution is regulation. I think the solution is proof of reserves. And a lot of exchanges, and I know, for example, Coinbase and Kraken, both voluntarily do proof of reserves. You can store the data of how many actual coins are on your exchange on the blockchain that cannot be modified without a T-split. So that can be put on the blockchain where people can verify, transparency can absolutely transparently verify the amount on the exchange. It's not a problem. So everyone's quickly jumping to government regulation and they have to, right? Because we now have the Federal Reserve in beta testing for the Fed dollar, digital dollar, Fed now. That is they're already moving us. So think about this. There's no way the government can move us to a central bank digital currency, CBDC, which in America will be the digital dollar on the Fed Now system, which is now fully in beta testing, and the Fed is rolling it out to test. It's actually being tested now with commercial banks. There is no way we can move to a centralized central bank digital currency on the blockchain that the central banker controls, while we have at the same time a decentralized system that doesn't have any regulation or oversight, that they cannot control, that is being fully verified by proof of reserves on the blockchain. So this is the problem for FTX and all crypto exchanges, as that they are leveraging this for control. They must be able to control decentralized finance because they want to move us to this opposite, which is centralized digital currency. Now, a lot of people think, well, everyone loves the blockchain and everybody loves crypto. This is a good thing. And they're leveraging the fact that everyone thought that, decentralized blockchain finance was a great thing for freedom and for Americans. Now the government's going to turn around and regulate that and have all kinds of reporting that they will get done through the exchanges themselves. And that's how they're going to go after this. And so we can see that our digital currency is moving forward as they planned, and that they are now attacking and leveraging the FTX situation, which happened very quickly, by the way, after the election. I thought that was really interesting how just immediately after the election was over, this happens. I mean, it happened the same week. It happened within a matter of 2 days. It was a massive situation that just bam happened out of the blue. So that's a little odd to me too. Again, it's not something, there's so much happening that I have to go into deep layers to really discuss. But I just wanted to bring up the FTX because I know you guys would say, you didn't do a podcast and then FTX, I mean, you didn't even mention it. FTX is a huge tip of the iceberg. It is just the beginning. And I will tell you that FTX, there's a lot of contagion worry that other investment wirehouses, big investors, big banks, a lot of different groups had investments with FTX. So the contagion impact of the fallout of this money just disappearing is a problem. We're going to be looking and keep following closely, obviously. So, the central bankers, the Great Reset, Klaus Schwab was just with the G20 this week, where he basically, it's interesting that an NGO, a non-government organization that basically is the World Economic Forum, which we know the World Economic Forum is they've rebranded it. It's called now a public-private partnership, but it's really a version of fascism. I've said this before. Fascism was using corporations to do what the government couldn't because people have human rights against their government. We have a Bill of Rights. We have human rights against a government entity. And this is really a foundational and fundamental concept that we all have to understand as American citizens, as Americans. We have to say, where do our rights derive from? Do they derive from the government? Does the government grant us our rights, our human rights, such that if the government changes, then the government can decide no longer do you have this right, like the right to freedom of speech, or no longer have that right? Where does the government, where do our rights derive from? And obviously the Declaration of Independence very clearly states that all people are free people and that we are endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights. In other words, it's right there in the document that we are endowed by our Creator, God, of our rights. And that means that no government state of man, no matter how formed, can just simply take them away. They don't come from the government. And people no longer understand our system. They no longer understand our rights. They do not understand how this country was founded, on what principles that we were founded. And we have lost that battle. And it's on us. It's our fault. We were apathetic. We let the schools teach whatever, and we just were busy with our lives. And now we've realized that it's a part of our civic duty to make sure, in order to preserve a country as unique as America. And if you ever talk to any historians or listen to any historians, everyone will tell you there's never been public founding documents like the Constitution ever in any country in the history of the world. And we're also not a democracy. I keep hearing, democracy is going to die. We're a republic. We're a representative democracy, which is, i.e., a republic. And the founding fathers did that intentionally because they thought that it would be possible that the average person could not understand what was going on, and that we needed to have another person voting that had representation authority. So that's why we're a republic. It's not a democracy. And we should be glad it's not a democracy, because democracies always fail. There's never been a long-term, moving over 300-year democracy ever in the history of the world. There is none. They all fail somewhere between 200 and 300 years. And it's simply because when you have a pure democracy, majority rules, and majority eventually will vote for benefits for themselves that the minority supports until the minority says, I'm not supporting that anymore. And it all implodes upon itself. Rome is a perfect example. This is just a broad general podcast because everything now is coming to a head. Everything has taken all of this time. We've gone through 2 different election cycles in America. We have the verge of a precipice. Just yesterday, November 15th, we were getting reports that Poland was being bombed. And of course, everyone was blaming Russia. And it comes to be that apparently even Ukraine today says it's their air defense missile system that potentially misfired. Don't quote me. This is the day after, so I don't know exactly what's happened, and I haven't read it, but I just want you to know, bombs falling on Poland, which is a NATO member, changes the dynamics of the situation. And everybody knows that. So thankfully, Biden, while he was over at the G20 summit, said that he thought that was not Russia. So I was really happy that he calmed the situation, because, there's a lot of countries that America has gone in, Afghanistan, Iraq, so many that we could name, that we've gone in as the big bad, and we're here and we're America and you're not going to bully us. That is not the game we can play with Russia. The Russian nuclear arsenal could obliterate us. Our nuclear arsenal could obliterate them. This is not a situation where we can play the game of who has the biggest nuclear arsenal. We could obliterate each other. So we have to have cool heads rule. So if you were to look at this from the outside, you'd say, wow, global pandemic, global impact economically, global stimulus, hyper stimulus with all of the central bankers that printed too much money, $30 trillion globally in the world through coronavirus, created us on a currency destruction path that cannot be stopped at this point. I know that the CPI numbers came down slightly to 7.7, and we're celebrating that, and we should celebrate that. We should celebrate that. It's temporary. And if we don't, we are moving to a new system, so it's really going to be a moot point. But the point is, if we were to stay with this system, it's interesting. The market, the day that the CPI number was announced, the market went up massively. And it's not because the market cares that much about the CPI number. It's because anytime the CPI number comes in with a reduction, everybody in the market thinks this means the Fed's going to pivot. And that means what a Fed pivot means is the Fed is going to go back from raising rates and not spending money, but actually running off the balance sheet. They're wanting to run off about $60 billion a month off the balance sheet. So they're raising rates, they're running off the balance sheet. Pivoting would mean to start cutting rates again back to low levels where cost of capital is extremely cheap and businesses can spend whatever they want because it's so cheap. It's like water. And they start stimulating again. They start putting liquidity back through printed dollars into the economy again, which is really what our markets need. Which brings me back to this FTX. What was FTX? FTX was one of the main things is that they created their own tokens. So they would have underlying assets, let's say equities, right? But instead of just buying the underlying asset, you buy a token that derivative, deriving its value from the underlying asset that's being held. So it's really the monetization of other assets that you could buy directly if you wanted to hold them. And there's lots of reasons. Oh, you can have a basket of diversification, sort of like ETFs, except for instead of having the actual assets in the actual fund, you have the assets in a fund, but then you don't sell the fund, which has the actual assets in it, tied to it for the tethering. You sell the token directly. So it's a derivative, and it allows companies that write these derivatives to create, they're monetizing, they're creating value where it didn't previously exist. If I have a stock, right, I can own the stock. That's a certain store of value. But if I go out and create another asset that derives its value from the value of this stock, now I have two assets. It's a derivative asset, and it's monetization, or the creating of additional wealth based on wealth that was otherwise contained. So this is the derivatives, not specifically FTX, because that's a new SPACs and all those things. That's a new thing, right? But when I showed you guys a couple podcasts ago how much total derivatives our investment banks had, and I said to you, this is a liquidity crisis in the making. This is what I'm talking about, you guys. There is not enough value in all of the derivatives that have been sold that will be contained, will be realized. We don't have that value. It is a derivative of something that was already valued and was already part of the system. You're just creating wealth out of thin air when you're deriving these tokens. And so the derivatives, once again, because man cannot control his greed. You might be able to control it. I might be able to control it. But society in general, if you give society a mechanism by which they can create out of thin air wealth, they don't have enough discipline to refrain. And so once again, since 2008 and 2009 GFC, we have derived assets again that we have no true, real intrinsic ability to support the value of. And in a liquidity crisis, which is what we are in this country, they've been doing a really good job of keeping it at bay, but you cannot stop what is inevitable, which is the collapse of the currency. It is not stoppable at this point. The only question is the timing. Many people say 2023. Those people, in my opinion, are wrong. It is not coming next year. It is coming now. You need to prepare. So I say all of these things 52 minutes into this podcast to tell you we are at the end of this thing. You are going to see massive things happen now in 2022 before December 31st. You will see it. And so I will stress to you again, it is time to prepare. You should likely have a good 6 weeks of cash at home. The bail-in has already started. There are already banks that are not letting you get your money out, that you have to set appointments, just like I told you was going to happen. This is also happening with investment management accounts. They are trying to delay paperwork and delay people getting their funds out and transferring funds. So you should effectuate whatever you think makes you feel comfortable at this point. I fully expect that this market is the hopefulness before the end comes. You could say, because October was such a great month, you could call all of October a dead cat bounce. You could call it multiple things. If you go back and look at all of our massive market corrections and the months before, we always have a high run up. It is a factor every time. Why? Because it's the last bit of hope that people have that the market is going to return to normal, what they consider normal, which is a market that is constantly going up. So do not be fooled by market days that are up and October that was positive, because this is coming very fast now. And I think that a lot of people are going to be extremely caught off guard, extremely not prepared, and they are not going to be able to deal with this well at all. You will be able to deal with it if you have cash reserve at home, you have food, you have water, you have batteries, you have gas, maybe a generator. If you're in a city, I highly suggest you talk to your suburban friends, your rural friends, and get a plan of exit to safety as these things begin to happen. I would love to share with you what is about to come, but it's not something I can do as I like to give facts and documentation. And unfortunately, I can't give you facts and documentation for something that has not yet happened. This is obviously information that I believe is coming, and I'm publicly going out there on a limb to share it with you, for you to share it with others, because this is going to happen, and it is going to happen before the year is over. There are things that are in motion that they can't be stopped, and this is going to happen. So I urge you to prepare I'm in Florida. We prepare for hurricanes all the time. So for me, it's like a hurricane preparation with maybe a little bit more cash at home, maybe think of, and I don't know, I can't give you guys advice on how long banks potentially won't be accessible or callable. If you have a big national bank, there's dealing with millions of clients, you're going to be in a long line and it's going to take time. So that's why we've said, maybe local banks, credit unions could potentially be easier to work with when all of these things come. So I just wanted to encourage you, because I know this can be a little bit of a confusing time. It seems like we're on the brink of World War III at any moment. It seems like, we have food problems that are coming now. I know there's a lot of people that are writing in that they're really now seeing the supply chain problems I've been talking about for months and months and months. Hopefully you've been stocking up. So, I just want to encourage you, because it can seem like this is all going the route of, central bank currencies and control of the money supply and the beginning of the end of our freedoms as we've known them to be in this country. And I just want to tell you with absolute confidence and certainty with what I'm going to share, that is not what is going to happen. That is not what is going to happen. These people can say it all they want. They can proclaim it all they want. They will not be able to bring what they think, which is this digital currency and this control of the world through their money, which is what they already do in China with their social credit scores and their voucher system. It's really a voucher system. Central bank digital currency is not cash. It's not even currency. It's a voucher system that the central bank, in this case in America, the Federal Reserve, gets to say, and of course it doesn't start off like that. There's no system that is designed to control you that starts off showing you that you're going to be controlled. No. They're going to start off talking to you about all the benefits and, oh my gosh, it's going to be great. You're going to have your digital ID verified and there'll never be fraud anymore. And it's going to sound great, especially people that have had identity theft. It's going to be like, oh, this sounds wonderful. Sign me up. Let me do this. It's going to sound attractive, just like blockchain and crypto sounds attractive, right? Until you realize that the person that controls your money digitally controls you. And when you realize that, if you get into that situation and that's all of your money and all of your wealth is centrally controlled, it's too late. So I have said very clearly and very directly, there is no chance that a free America wants and understands what can come from a tyrannical perspective from a central bank that control your money. Can't let that happen, especially in this country, in America, where the central bank is a private corporation that was chartered in 1913 by Congress. The Federal Reserve is not a government institution. It is a private corporation. That was a mistake that we made in 1913. It cannot be undone, but it can be changed moving forward. And the Federal Reserve pushing us to central bank digital currency exclusively, because it won't be a voluntary system. The Federal Reserve pushing us to a central bank digital currency exclusively is 100% against freedom and liberty. And that is why they will fail. The Great Reset will fail. You will see it. I won't even have to tell you what it is. When this happens, you will know. And it is here. You will see massive developments before the end of 2022. I would bet my life on it. I hope that this gives you some comfort and peace in a world that otherwise seems absolutely crazy. Remember, at the end of the day, we're all humans. No human has authority over any other human. We are all free, loving beings endowed by our Creator, God, with our rights. And no human and no government and no institution and no corporation and no Section 230 and nothing on earth that man creates can change that fact. Not now, not 1,000 years from now, not ever, never. We have our rights from God and we will defend them. God bless you, everybody. Take care. And until next time we'll have probably more of a market one, but this one was a timely update. The end is near. Take care.